Okay, if you're online, we're getting ready to start the Birds of a Feather session on anonymity and pseudonymity. I just have to once again express my awe at the variety of music playlists that we have available to us at this venue. It's been really startling. Aesthetics, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, suggested this session to me. He's, of course, been with us before and is a member of the IDESG. I think this is a very important set of issues, and some of the things that we've been discussing and hearing in the pilot readouts, I think, make it very clear that that's the case. So, Aesthetics, if you'd like to come here to moderate the discussion, and if you go ahead. I don't know. Can we show slides? Do we have the capability to show a slide, Kay? Oh, Kay isn't here. Oh, yes, we have technical support.
Supplementals for some things that coming off an iPad. It's an iPad, and I have a VGA adapter.
And by the way, Aesthetics, if you brought anyone else with you from the NIM community, if you could introduce them, that would be fabulous.
Actually, one of them is almost here.
Okay, so, cool.
Yeah. Hello. How's everyone doing? Wow, that actually got about 60% of the room. I guess everyone else is eating. Let's see. But what's that? And thanks, Bob, for the intro and such. What's that? I got a comment already. Wow.
See, Asterix and Mike Garcia in the same room being two different people.
Oh, that's you. Okay. You're the one that made all those squid jokes on the emails.
And that's right. We also proved you're not squid, at least by initial appearance.
Is that verified? Okay, hold on. Okay, so I guess I could just kind of start this off, and if my phone dings, it's because I have a friend who is coming to join us, and she is trying to park right now, and apparently this place is kind of a maze, even though she lives just down the street. So as I begin, first off, how many people here paid attention to, say, the commentary that was going on in the taxonomy list? A few? Okay, so because there was some discussion, because one of the fundamental elements of, I guess, communication is language and defining words, and so the taxonomy or the glossary or whatever you want to call it, team was having a discussion on what do words like pseudonymity, anonymity, and nimity and so on mean. And let me close Candy Crush here. I have a couple of things. So to begin with, I got interested in identity stuff long before I heard about IDESG. Anyone here familiar with NIM wars? Okay, there's a few hands over here. Anyone? So, and this is not going to be just bad-mouthing Google+, which is what that was all about. So in the summer of 2011, Google, you guys have all heard of Google? Google rolled out this service called Google+, and a lot of us thought it was really cool because we have the ominous big bad guy Facebook and Twitter, which I'm actually quite friendly with. I think Twitter is awesome. But I wanted to see something come along and take down Facebook, and Google seemed to be the best competitor, the best contender to do so, and they unrolled the service called Google+, which was framed as kind of a social network, kind of an integrate and everything together, and everything was really cool except for this one little tiny thing they had called the quote-unquote real names policy. And I discovered this because I got suspended from Google using it. And the interesting thing about this is once you have a consolidated service, and this isn't necessarily about federated identity so much as the way Google has consolidated all of their services, that be maps or email or basically, I haven't used Google in a couple of years, so I don't know what all their services are at this point. But imagine, not only does it make everything easier because you have a single login, but it's also a single point of failure and a single point of access. And if you get denied that point of access, then you're kind of screwed. And before I go any further, is this being recorded? Okay. Is it being live streamed? Oh, sweet. Okay. Yeah, and I tend to ramble on a bit, so feel free to interrupt me with questions and such. So, let's see. What's that? Oh, the slides, right. And I can't multitask either. So, let me load up. Let's see. Here's a presentation I can use. As you can see, I've spoken a lot about this. All right. So here's a screenshot. What?
Your connector is...
Let's see if that works.
That is the issue.
Okay. Yeah, I can't multitask at all. I'm sure that I'm not the only one in this room with that issue. So, okay. Do we have a screenshot now?
No.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
I'm going to just keep talking.
Keep talking. Okay. So this is a screenshot of what it looked like when I got suspended. And again, this is 2 years ago, and actually almost 3. And beyond that, I do want to mention, by the way, this is not harping on Google. And Google has actually adjusted their names policy to allow certain things. Like the common theme that came up is, what about Lady Gaga? Like, she has a different legal name, and nobody. It's Stephanie something. I don't know. Okay, so one person in the room knows it, but most people know her as Lady Gaga, and most movie stars, for example, have a different name than they were born with. So this is one of the things we began to address. Let's see what slides I have here. So one of the things I like to point out to begin with, and this got me thinking, being suspended got me thinking about identity, and I like to point out that identity is not the same thing as a name. And turns out that we're having that discussion on the taxonomy list as well. And the question is, what is identity? What is identifiers? Identifiers, maybe they're metadata or something like that. So, and on the left there, I've got Adam naming the animals. I like to pull up references from the Bible and Genesis, because it turns out that our forefathers and foremothers had a lot of things to say about this too. And Adam naming the animals, by the way, creating the Adamic language within the Garden of Eden, because, well, once you name something, you have a degree of power over it, which is why I'm kind of wary of government-issued ID names to that degree. So, in this context, a name can be a label or symbol that is used to identify a person, thing, or concept within a given context. So another example I can think of here is Prince, when the music artist Prince changed his name to that funny symbol thing. And these are just things that we kind of think about as we go through this. So I'm just going to try to keep this short because I know other people want to have input into this. So this is the model I kind of came up with to describe what I call Google's model. Again, other people do this too. And as somebody who uses multiple names in different contexts, this scares the living daylights out of me. It's very hierarchical and a very rigid system. And by the way, just a quick poll. What's the opposite of real? Oh, hi, Julia. Welcome, Julia. Yes. So what's the opposite of real? Unreal, okay. Like the game. Magic, okay. Imaginary, okay. Anyone else? Fake. In fact, the word pseudonym literally comes from the Greek pseudonym, meaning a fake name. And that is one interpretation of it. So the challenge with that is it creates this kind of a dualistic dynamic where you have that which is real and that which is fake, and therefore you have this kind of a one-itis of this one true name, and everything else is kind of disregarded. Or in this case, it's more legitimate or less legitimate. Legitimate literally coming from, I think, the Latin legitimare, meaning to make lawful. Therefore, something which goes within the law, and then something which is outside of the law. Therefore, you could consider a pseudonym to be unlawful, which is kind of terrifying. And the bottom line here is that labels give someone else power over you. So thought about this a lot. I'm very inspired by Carl Jung and Freud to some extent, but I'm a big fan of Jung, where he kind of defines identity, and I'm extrapolating from him, as you have these two types of identity. One is the rational and one is the emotional, where you have words and symbols and sets and things like that. And then emotion is the things which, are you happy or sad? Well, the words happy and sad are symbols. They're describing an emotion, something that you are feeling. Something which is an irrational, where rational is something which is defined and irrational is something which is not defined. So not that irrational is bad, it's just as much as rational as that which is defined, and maybe we're afraid of that which is undefined, but that's something for another story. So judging off of this, and this is kind of a juxtapose of two different types of identities, the conscious or the unconscious, the rational, the irrational, and so on. And if you bring this into this kind of model of identity I came up with, wherein you have the kind of the yin-yang thing, which is what we just saw, the rational and irrational identities. And then you have all these other different things here, like the Twitter. So each of these circles is what I would call a system or a circuit or a network or whatever you want to call it, wherein you have Twitter, and Twitter, I would consider that a system. It's a computer system. It's also a social system where people use it, and it has a protocol, 140 characters and so on. And the lines that you see there between, say, the yin-yang, which is yourself or your persona and whatnot, and Twitter is the relationship that you have with that system. So it's basically a relationship between two systems. And the reason it's important, I think, to call it a relationship is because you can have all kinds of things like trust, like agreements, and things like that that are based upon relationships. Second, it's a bipartisan consent. And all these different things that we think about relationships in everyday life come into play with this. And that's why things like terms of services are really interesting, which is why, for example, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act's potential interpretation that a terms of service of a website is legally binding is scary. It's really scary to me. And bottom line here is that I define that labels are, these names that we have are where labels are used to help define a relationship. So in the Jungian sense of a rational identity where you have a word that's describing something, it's describing, in this case, a relationship between you and one or more entities. And another thing I just want to add in here, and the driver's license, by the way, I'm just using it to kind of capstone your relationship with a government. It's like the driver's license itself is simply a token, and that token has, you know, a name and probably has other attributes on it and such. But it's a token signifying a relationship that you have with the government or with the state government or a passport and so on. And then relationship D there, it's Jack is the name that's derived from John Smith. And because the word nickname actually literally, it's etymologically an additional name. Oh, hi. So what I'm getting at here is that, well, if your legal name is John Smith and everyone calls you Jack, well, that is actually a relationship that you have with people wherein the name described based on that name is derived from the legal name. And one other thing that I like to mention in terms of, if you walk away with nothing else, I like to impose the idea that there's no such thing as a real name. There are many kinds of names. There's legal names, there's birth names, there are, I don't know, pet names like Zuko's Triangle and so on. But real name is actually, I think, not only is it a non sequitur, but it's also really, really dangerous. And I just noticed the screen in front and sort of staring at that thing. Yeah, like I said, I can't multitask at all. Oh, question, okay.
So, hi, Bob from Citi again. Is this on? Yeah. Okay, yay. So one of the things that is really resonant with me about this is if you look at the Twitter example specifically, there's a really interesting property of Twitter handles that make it clear why it's important that a legal name not be the identifier used in the Twitter environment. And that is, so take me, for example. Okay, by some definition, there are either 0 Bob Blakeleys, because my legal name is actually George Robert Blakely III, right? Or there are 2, because my father's also Bob Blakely, right? Or maybe there's more. But 0 or 2 aren't good answers for Twitter. Twitter needs handles to be uniquely identified with an individual. And legal names can't satisfy that criterion because the way we issue them doesn't guarantee uniqueness. So even if you sort of have an emotional feeling that a legal name is in some way morally superior to a pseudonym, it just doesn't work functionally in an environment where names have to be unique. Because what you have to do is you have to take a name and qualify it with other attributes, which becomes just an impossibly clumsy way to refer to individuals.
Absolutely. And I'll comment on that in a second because that's an excellent point because a lot of this is all context-based. And I just want to mention here just a couple different types of names. The one that I really like to point out is the way that I define pseudonym here is, and I'll read it off of this, a name that might not be found on or linkable to previously. Well, actually, that's an old definition. So the definition that I commonly use for pseudonym now is it's a name which hides or covers a base name. And the reason that I say that is because if you have a pseudonym and you have a base name, that implies that there are 2 names involved. And the base name is really important. A lot of people will think that the base name is maybe your legal name or the name that you were born with or whatnot. Whereas the phrase an autonym is more, it comes from autonomy, like self-rule, self-regulation. So an autonym is a name that you give yourself. And there are people, like the example that I like to cite for an autonym is Pope Francis. Because I think his legal name is George Bergoglio. I could be wrong. Yeah, okay. So who is going to say that Pope Francis is a fake name? Yeah, I mean, there are examples of pseudonyms. My favorite example is Deep Throat, who turned out to be Mark Felt. And people who are familiar with Watergate know that one. And you can see that where you have deep throat and then a Mark Felt, you have the kind of hierarchical structure. So it does exist where you have the base name. But Pope Francis, I don't think that one of the names is superior to the other. I think that they both exist within their own given contexts. And that is why a name as identifying somebody in your role within a context is really important. Oh, yeah, sure.
So this is Tom Sullivan, Healthcare. I was struck when you said there's no such thing as a real name, and then you use base name, and I'm wondering, but in medicine, and I think it's probably even more true emerging in law, your DNA name is pretty close to being something that, I won't say it's the real name or the base name, but it's pretty close to being a name. And I'm not proposing this or saying anything else, but I'm just telling you in medicine, I foresee the future as your DNA sequence in just like a long URL, but maybe a friendly name. So I hope you're considering DNA as part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a number of things with medicine, but Julia, it seemed like you had a response to that. To the microphone.
Into the mics because the people.
Thank you for that.
I was going to ask precisely what you meant by DNA name, actually, but an identifier derived from nucleic base sequences or something, which isn't actually really how the body works. But okay.
So let me maybe address that a little bit, since my wife was a forensic DNA examiner for a while. So it's probably true that a long string of your nuclear DNA stretched out to all 23 chromosomes is distinctive enough if you don't have any identical twins, and stable enough over time, modulo some mutations and things, that your confusion is unlikely to arise. But what people usually think of in a DNA context is like an RFLP or an STR. Essentially probe map of your DNA, and here be dragons, right? There are lots of opportunities for confusion and misreading and error and stuff in something like that. So if we talk about, the sequence of my DNA describing me, in some sense that's canonically true, it's not clear that it's practical in terms of time or storage to use it for many purposes, but there are some purposes for which it definitely is.
Absolutely, and I think it all boils down to context. And I mean, having, say, a legal name or even a medical name that is unique to you is really important, so that, say, nobody can access your medical records who is not you. Another?
I was just going to mention one of the big problems with using DNA as an identifier is that there's actually the mutation rate even in a single organism, like a human being, is actually huge. And there's and things like mosaicism and chimerism is actually really, really common as well. Where basically, if you take a pair of cells from two different places on the same person, you can end up with different sets of DNA. And it's actually really, really common, actually. So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, so I just wanted to make another comment, and I wonder if I actually have a diagram of Zuko's triangle. No, I don't. Okay, this is a... are you guys familiar with the Zuko's triangle? I'm sure Julia is, but... So the idea of Zuko's triangle, it's basically a pick 2 out of 3. Global, secure, and unique. Where it's basically fast, cheap, and good, pick 2. You can't have all 3 of them. So the example that I often use, I used this at a talk I gave like a year ago, is that... Like, take a domain name, like CNN.com or something. It's global. Everyone who has access to DNS can access that, and it's memorable. You're not going to forget CNN.com if you know about CNN. However, it's prey to phishing attacks and all kinds of computery things. And there are ways to mitigate that, like with pet names, where you take a signature and append it to it, and you have kind of the key-value pair. But in general, the notion is that within any given context, you're going to either have some non-human readable identifier, like a UUID of some sort, or you're going to have a limit, and that's where things like Dunbar's number, the 150 people in your social system limit, comes into play. So that's one of the places where names get really, really tricky. And also, let's say that you have, in the United States, you have 10,000 people named John Brown, But in the state of Florida, you only have two. One of them lives in Sarasota. The other one lives in Tampa. So it's one of and this is why the metadata discussion that's been going on is so critical, because you add in more attributes, you can identify somebody very quickly. So any other questions so far? Okay, yeah, let's do a discussion. I want to get my food because I... What? Oh, Kalia, do you have something to say?
No, I was just wondering if those who actually want to discuss, we might cluster on two tables.
Okay. If people who want to discuss want to cluster onto the table, we could do that. Is there a way to... Oh, yeah, online. Yes, yes. Okay. Okay. Here, let me do that. I said, let me do that. No, I was just going to leave that up for now. Okay, I'll just leave that up because it's kind of the crux of everything, and I'll pass the mic around to anybody who wants to comment or whatnot. Okay.
Can we handle the questions here?
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I was very intrigued about the concept that the Twitter NIM is unique, has to be unique, and that it masks a base name. What would you regard as the minimum number of masks that can uniquely identify every person on the planet? I would postulate that your government-issued name, or whatever that birth name is, your city of residence, and your cell phone number with the international dialing code, those three attributes can actually uniquely identify every person on the planet. The point of the question is, if we bind some kind of name, or I would prefer to call it a token, to a publicly discoverable payment address that has economic value to the individual, that would be a contribution that would, be in this namespace somehow. And I just don't know what to call it, whether I should call it a token or some kind of NIM. What is the name for that label that binds to the payment address?
I think that, are you talking about Bitcoin or USD? Or?
Any system of economic value where you have a bank account, a debit card number, a Bitcoin account, any method that can have the principle of deposit only, so that cannot be debited against your wishes, can only receive like an anti-siphon water valve. So that's a routable identifier that can be used in the payment networks. But you need a handle for it. You need a name for it. I'm searching for the taxonomy for what is that name called? Is that name called a token? Is that name called something else?
Do you have any ideas on that, Julia? You're sitting there thinking.
I'll think about it.
Okay. Oh, an eco name. I love that. Or an eco nym, maybe. Yeah. So one of the challenges, and this is something that I probably should have mentioned, within the notion of anonymity or pseudonymity and whatnot, it's not just enough that somebody has a name. It's a name that you are known by, and it implies a relationship. So when you are anonymous, it's not, oh, I'm anonymous. It's, to whom are you anonymous? And it describes that relationship. So when you have an identifier, like for a bank number or a bank name or something that people can reach you by, who is it that you're targeting? And like what character set are they using, things like that. Yes.
Hi, James Lewis Fenton, more commonly called Jim. So as you've observed, we've had in the taxonomy committee discussions a lot of talk about anonymity and pseudonymity and their characteristics and that sort of thing. So, I mean, there's no absence of focus on this issue in IDESG. I guess the question that I've got is, do you have a call to action? Is there an outcome that you're looking for from IDESG, or is this kind of an awareness raising session and that sort of thing? And then I've got another follow-up question after that.
Okay. So yes and yes. I would say this is an awareness, and it's for education, and hopefully I can learn from people too. And beyond that, I think one of the points of the involvement in the taxonomy group is to try to have codified into the taxonomy thing definitions which are NIM friendly as well as everyone else friendly, so as to be inclusive and not exclusive. Not that they are, it's just it's a matter of working together. And once we have a taxonomy, then perhaps we can build like a technical structure of some sort or a legal framework. The reason that I created this method, for example, it's intended as a framework for designing systems around it. So and open to interpretation.
Are you?
What? Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, and there was conversation about working to develop a model names policy so that sites who, just like you have a privacy policy, how do you deal with names that are different? Because Google did it poorly, but how do you, what's a good policy to have? And also to maybe have conversations about what are the types of transactions within the ecosystem where it's legitimate to ask for the real name on your real government paperwork, and have a narrow set of those so that you're not having every relying party under the sun asking for it and then refusing to do business with people who choose to use pseudonyms with an IDP who knows who they are so they can go get them if they do fraud. But how are we helping people? So part of it was, and we had originally, and Aesthetics wrote up the charter for a group to focus on this, and for various reasons it got directed into other places that never really developed a core community. So I think this was an alternative to having it under privacy where it didn't go anywhere and having it be a real committee. Hi, sorry, my name's Kalia, Identity Woman. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a great segue into my second second question, because I guess one thing that I'm not sure of is to what extent the identity ecosystem has to which it's in scope for us to dictate whether people, for any attribute, and I consider name to be an attribute, not an identifier, it's not clear to me to what extent the identity ecosystem has any authority to decide for a relying party what they need. Facebook wants to know my date of birth, and we get all sorts of requests for attributes that, it's kind of one of these am I going to give them the attribute? Am I going to self-assert a false value, or am I, do I need to give them the right thing? And I think name is in that category as well. And I think it's a huge rat hole for us to try and define for relying parties what they need in order to do business. It's part of their business model. In some cases, if they're asking for onerous amounts of information, some people are going to decide not to do business with them. In other situations, we'll look and say, well, yes, we know that banks are subject to know your customer requirements, and so in order to open this bank account, I really do need to give them a trustable assertion of my legal name. So, I mean, that's the question that I've got is sort of like, can IDESG do anything about this?
The first thing that comes to mind is that in the United States, and I guess everywhere, we seem to have this, and it's a good tension, we have this tension between government and free market. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. And the question is, to what degree does the government have the right to tell companies what to do? And I guess it also depends, and keep in mind, I'm still new to all this stuff, so I'm still learning how the IDESG works and such. The thing that comes to mind, and I don't know if this is within the scope, but a lot of these places that are becoming identity providers, and Facebook and Google are just easy targets, there are more of them though, are also assuming the status of a quasi-public space, and people kind of develop their own personas through it. And at what point do we draw the line? And it's just, these are all just things to think about. And maybe the IDESG does nothing, but people keep these on the back burner in mind as they develop policies. Is that a decent answer to that? It's complicated. The answer is really complicated.
Okay, so I guess in another sense, and everybody knows I'm not a lawyer, right? So, in another sense, you're kind of saying that they're achieving sort of monopoly status, and therefore might need some regulation as a result of that. Sort of another way to look at it, and sort of in the antitrust world.
So yes, I'll let him answer your follow-on, and we also have governments that decided to step in and regulate the behavior of private enterprise relative to discriminating against people because of the color of their skin or their religion or their fact that they have disabilities. And that in many ways names give away a lot of that information. And if people want to choose not to reveal that information online because they have the freedom not to present their body, which inherently gives away those things, they should be free not to. And the way Google ended up acting, at least for a period of time early on when what it did was is like, well, this is the same as wearing shirts and shoes in a restaurant. And it was like, no, it's like telling the brown people to go sit at the back of the restaurant. So I think there's a set of conversations we need to have about people of difference choosing how they express themselves online, and that these things become civil rights issues.
Well, the civil rights issue could apply to other attributes as well. I mean, there are lots of examples of people being discriminated on the basis of their zip code. So, I don't know. It's a little difficult for me to think exactly how IDESG as constituted can do that. It sounds like it's a sort of bigger public policy issue than something that we can really do.
And what comes to mind, and this is something I've thought about a lot, because the question of where does law fall into it. So Germany, for example, has the Telemedia Act, which makes it by law, I think the terms is service providers within Germany must allow pseudonymity and anonymity. And there's also the European Court of Human Rights, which basically enhances that to some degree. I can't remember the legal terms right offhand. I am also not a lawyer. However, there isn't really any similar protection in the United States. Yeah?
Hi, Joe Grubbs with Binary Structures Corporation. Fascinating discussion, actually. A couple of reflections, some part questions.
Good.
Yeah. First, I know within the Commonwealth of Virginia, there's a 7-day lag between the birth event and the issuance of a birth certificate. In the absence of a birth mother after the birth event, there's a child with an identity that is given by the hospital or the caregiver or whomever, but not a name. And so just to put that out there, something to reflect on. It's another example of the disconnect between the two constructs. The second is, I'm wondering if you've considered allegorical names.
Well, that's why I draw it into relationships, and you ask what the systems are and such. I mean, this is something that I dreamed up like a year or two ago, and please add more things to it. I'm open sourcing this. How about that?
No, that's great. I think it's wonderful. Third, I would love to have a pet name that's derived from my DNA. I just think that would be quite fascinating, actually. And the last is, I used to live in Orlando, so I want to know where you got your T-shirt.
Yeah, I haven't been sued yet for this reason, so okay. By the way, I just wanted to add to that, because people, one of the common misconceptions that the Social Security number is kind of this uniform identifier within the United States. So thank you, FDR, for that. But also, I had a friend who grew up in a very rural area where his parents were kind of hippies, and he didn't actually have a Social Security number until he tried to go to college, and they required one on their application. So, and then that was really an interesting conversation for him.
Brian Page. I do a lot of government contracting support. I work with FICAM Program Office. And I'm going to twist this a little bit into the framework that I work in, which is promoting attributes and use of attributes. And one of our mantras is your PIV card does not contain attributes, because it has your name and it has things that no one is going to actually use to determine if you have access to a system. They don't care if my name is Ryan. They care if I am a federal employee or a contractor, or if I work in procurement, or whatever thing they care about. They don't care if my name's Ryan versus Bob. And I see a lot of a parallel with this, of the way attributes work, is my name is Jack to people who have an attribute of family or friend. To the government, I have a very, John Smith, but I also probably have I probably associate with my employer's tax number, because that's how they pay me. So some of this is, I think, through attributes, and the econame idea, I think, worked a little bit for that, except those are almost privacy abandoning attributes. I never, ever want to tell a random person my address for an economic relationship, because then I don't want to give them my phone number. I don't want them calling me until I know that I trust them not to call me at 2 a.m. So I think one of the takeaways for the IDESG may be look at attributes and then look at privacy minimizing attributes. Look at how you can, rather than pass have an IDP that I log into Facebook and it says Ryan's birthday is, April 1st, have Facebook ask what it needs my address for, or my name, or my birthday for, which is to make sure that I'm over 13. And maybe they want to send me a birthday card, but I don't want it. So what they really want to know is, am I old enough to sign up for their service and not get them in legal trouble? So have my IDP not answer what's my birthday, but is he older than 13? So I have minimized that in my interactions, and I think that's something that we can build architecturally into systems that challenge response for attributes, so that you're not exposing them to people who don't actually need the attribute. And that can fit into use cases, that can fit into architectural design.
We've got both of you guys questions? Okay, so 2 questions, and then I can deal with the remote ones. Okay. Yes.
So Tom Sullivan again, when I heard the 3 identifiers, whatever, first name, last name, city of residence, and cell phone, I said to myself, well, gee, there's a combination. So I think what IDESG could do is propose, and I'm saying maybe call it an eco name, a combination of names. So the eco name is a combination, and that combination can be whatever the person wants. So, but I'm saying some people, and I'm saying in that eco name there could be an LOA associated with it. So an LOA 1 is self-attested, unverified, whatever, low trust, low confidence, whatever the person wants.
The word verified is something else. I'm going to table that for now.
I won't. I'm just using that as
I understand.
whatever. Mm-hmm. You could say unaccountable, whatever you want, But an LOA 4 would be something that, has an economic... Exactly. So I'm just throwing this out.
No, it's great.
An eco name is a combination. It's up to the individual. It could have an LOA 1. It could have an LOA 4.
Okay. I'll take your question and then the internet ones. You've been standing up there for a while, so.
Oh, yeah. Well, I thought it might be helpful if we have this conversation, we continue along this theme, to come up with some archetypal examples of where...
Archetypes, I love archetypes. Yeah.
Where we might want to be concerned about particularly bad outcomes if people are forced to reveal their legal names.
Somebody has a stalker, domestic abuse, things like that. Witness protection program. There's all kinds of examples.
So, a thought that comes to mind is the discussion around the increasing interest in using all sorts of data about individuals' activities online in credit decision making or employment decision making. And if name gets thrown into the model, probably isn't getting thrown into the model in many cases now, but if it is, what does that mean, and what are the implications for values like non-discrimination?
And it sounds like you just also unlocked the data broker question, which I'm gonna. That's like several hours of discussion right there. But no, fantastic points. Thank you so much. Internet questions?
Here, I have the internet questions.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I have 2 different ones from 2 different people. So
Uh-oh.
The first one is from Kimberly with no last name. Do
Have
I
you verified
understand?
Kimberly?
Do I understand? It is about the right and value for anonymity, i.e., to not participate or to participate for ombudsman escalations. I was hoping you all knew what that meant. You don't?
Let me give it a little color.
Okay.
So Kimberly, who is not the Kimberly standing next to me, that's a good example. This is Bob, by the way. This isn't the only use case that's being discussed, but for example, both whistleblowers and people who are undertaking actions in ombudsman situations, maybe for labor relations or even for the IDESG, certainly there are anonymity and pseudonymity considerations there, and there are cases where the processes need to be designed to accommodate that in order both to make processes safe and to make them fair.
Yeah, the example that came to mind when you brought up that question was, what if somebody gives an anonymous tip to the police and they're able to solve a crime?
Okay, I have one more.
Sure.
This is from Scott Stevenson. Sorry, Kim.
Oh, no.
Okay. I agree that pseudonymity and anonymity has to be included somehow in the IDESG framework. I am an IT manager in Saudi Arabia. I have 14,000 users between the ages of 18 and 40. 1,300 use Ahmed as their last name. 57 have the same birthday. Because of this, using a user's last name as a part of their user ID means that securing my network is not possible because my system is only secured by their password. Due to the fact a hacker already knows multiple users' usernames, A Ahmed, B Ahmed, C Ahmed, D Ahmed, etc. So a simple blunt force password attach is very easy to accomplish. Thereby having a username on my system is a security violation.
So I actually want to add to that because that's a fantastic point. A friend of mine, Virgil Griffith, actually did a study several years ago on... So often when you forget your password and you're trying to log back in, they ask you questions like, what's your mother's maiden name? So a friend of mine did a study on, I think it was Texas birth records, and found there was actually there was a probable correlation between what somebody's name was and what their mother's name might be. And actually... that's kind of creepy when you think about it, but in terms of what we are using as security questions, how many people have a PIN number of 1234, for example? And by the way, regarding passwords, there's two reasons I have issues with using biometrics. Number one is if your identity, if your fingerprint gets compromised, you can't really go get a new fingerprint. If your social gets compromised, you can go get a new social. It's kind of tricky to do it. The other thing is that fingerprints actually change over time. I'm talking like over a decades-long period, but that does change, and there's been some research into that. So,
are there any more online?
Well, I have
go ahead.
New ones, but
oh, great.
No,
okay.
go ahead.
All right, sorry. So Kimberly with no last name has another comment. The PIV ID concept has an equivalent LOA that could be modeled for an econym.
What is PIV?
Oh.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, and then Courtney Brown says, can the IDESG address the issue of data enrichment where different ID providers, like state DMV, will sell information on attributes? Gender, age, race, address, DOB to another agency. Essential address member / liaison responsibilities in inappropriate disclosure / transferring of attributes and data.
That sounds like a data broker question, which scares me, but I'll hand it over to Bob.
Right. So that's not exactly an anonymity and pseudonymity question. It's a data custodianship question, although certainly the risk of having something like that happen and harm you is reduced if you're using a pseudonym rather than a real name. But I think Kim Little Sutherland, who actually works for a data broker, might be able to address that and also ask her question.
So I was just going to say that the whole discussion around names is really important when it comes to data resolution, and or identity resolution. And I spend a lot of time talking about identity resolution in the context of data minimization, right? Because the whole idea is, what is the minimal amount of information that is needed for you to add me into your service? I'm opting in to be a customer of coffee shop down the street. And I wanted to be able to activate my loyalty card so that I can get more coffee shop services. And so I'm okay with giving you some pieces of information. But what's needed for you to be able to uniquely identify me or uniquely put me within your broader database? And so part of that came into context with our identity proofing and verification committee or project that was part of a different organization. And I just want to tell you some of the things that we were thinking that we had to think about as we were trying to deal with the minimization issues. And so one of it was the effectiveness, right? So how effective is a particular attribute being able to uniquely identify you? So the example about the name, all these are going to be very demographic driven. So while there are hundreds and thousands of Ahmeds in one area, there may not be in a different area, right? And so my family lives in Puerto Rico, but the last name is Fitzpatrick. There are not a lot of Fitzpatricks in Puerto Rico, amazingly. Sensitivity, that's a really challenging thing to look at, because while half of us thought one thing was sensitive, somebody that was a father said, I would not want to have my daughter share this piece of information. And we didn't think of it. So you put on a different hat based off of your life experiences, and sensitivity has a whole different meaning to a lot of people. Accessibility is important. And so using that example with a cell phone number, everybody does not have a cell phone. So you couldn't necessarily use that combination for everybody, because while there are 90+% of Americans, adults, who have cell phones, what do we do with the other 10% of people? And we have to take that into context. Reliability, so the whole thing about it changing over time, is that necessary? When we started doing our study, we actually found out that the stability of things was not as critical, because as long as you still had other trends going on, it didn't matter if your gender changed or your name changed or whatever it was that changed. And my name's changed a lot of times. And then the most important thing was necessity. How important is it for you to have that particular piece of information? And sometimes there are legal or regulatory reasons as to why you have to get that information. So
thank you so much. Yeah, one thing that I just wanted to get in, because we've been talking a lot about uniqueness. If you guys are familiar with the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, they actually did a quasi-study on this. I think it's called Panopticlick. Okay, I'm seeing nods. So yeah, where it basically goes and does a fingerprint of your browser, which includes like what plugins you have enabled, do you have Flash, things like that, and assesses how many other browsers that have gone through the Panopticlick script, I guess, have the same signature as you. So it was just an interesting take on uniqueness and another way to look at this. Okay, any other comments? I can finally hand it off to discussion, I guess, with 2 minutes left. Oh, okay. Okay, so also, oh, you were going to say something? Okay. Yeah, just in closing, you see the logo up there for Nimrites, which is, I mean, it's basically just a blog that I threw together, and every time I think about something relating to NIM things, we have a couple of videos. I started to put together these little 3-minute videos. The most recent one addresses the Yelp lawsuit, if you guys have heard of that. It's a lawsuit going on in Virginia where, okay, 30-second summary. You guys all know what Yelp is? You leave reviews for restaurants. So there's a store called Hadip Carpet Cleaning that contested the legitimacy of, I think it was 7 reviews that were posted anonymously on the site. And they asked for a subpoena to get the names, or I guess the email addresses of the posters revealed to them. And it's currently in litigation, I think, right now, because if they do, that can either be resolution to libel, or it could be a violation of the First Amendment. So that's what my most recent video is about. Very interesting stuff. But yeah, so have we solved it yet? You guys all in agreement? We're good? Yeah, this is difficult. Thank you all for listening to me, though.
And thanks very much for bringing it to us. So these are the kinds of discussions that are going to linger for a long time, and I suspect that aesthetics, when you ask whether we've solved it yet, I suspect that a characteristic of this is that there is not an it, it's a them, right? And I think that there will be a variety of solutions, and they will be deployed in context. So we'll be doing this again and again and again. Okay, thanks very much for that. Our Birds of a Feather session time is over now, so we'll be destroying the wall in the middle of the room and coming back into the full session here, and we will convene in 5 minutes. So go get yourself a glass of water. Well, no, we start at 1:45 theoretically.
We'll just tell them about people we're late.
Yes, we'll be moving as quickly as possible.
I understand that the road is long. My journeys will fall in line. It's hard to breathe, my heart beats fast. My body is shaking, my time is past. I'm floating to another world. I'm hiding within myself. Where are we going? Will you say must I guess? Where are we facing? Is it the east or the northwest? Where are we heading? Have we been here once before? Oh,
with our committee report outs. Thank you very much.
Anna Wall and Luca reading Byron's poetry. She lit up like a flame coming straight at me, illuminated by the light of the moon. The ripples sliced through her like a silver tube. Magic colors formed, merging from the foam from another land that soon would call her home. Would she disappear?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen in the room, if we could resume our seats, we will get underway here. And those of you online, we are beginning the committee report out session. So first I'm going to turn it over to Jim Fenton to give us the Privacy Committee report, and then I'm going to ask Jim to stay up on stage and out of sequence with respect to the agenda, give us the use case ad hoc group report out, just so that we won't have to do the popping up and down thing. So Jim, thanks very much.
Sure. Hi, so good afternoon. Let me give a little bit of a summary of what's been going on in the privacy working group. I'm actually sort of the talking head for Stuart Shapiro, who is our chair, and who actually prepared some talking points for me. So thank you very much, Stuart, for that. But it's a little bit easier if somebody who's live in the room does the presentation, so I'm filling in here. So since the last plenary, the Privacy Committee has done its first reviews. It has formally reviewed the initial glossary that came from the taxonomy ad hoc group, found no issues with it, and has forwarded it on. And it's provided some initial feedback on the use cases, which we're waiting for a submission for formal review after it's been revised. There's still a little bit of work being done there. We have ratified and adopted version 1.5 of the PEM, of the Privacy Evaluation Methodology, and it's been great to hear from different people during this plenary that's finding use outside of our immediate committee evaluations, and so we will do our best to continue to keep that a useful document. And we have been processing some feedback, and we're soliciting feedback on the current version of the PEM, because there will be ongoing enhancements to that document that take place. So prior to the next plenary, we anticipate that we'll be doing that update of the PEM. We'll be making some minor tweaks to our charter based on our experience to date. And we're also working on sort of our operational efficiency, since especially we're seeing a number of evaluation requests that are starting to come in, and we've got a little bit of experience now from the initial reviews that we've done. We want to kind of sort of tighten up the sort of operational side of that in order to make sure that when something has been submitted to us that we acknowledge that, and we've got some goals and milestones about completing the evaluation of things that were sent, and we want to make sure that we're clear on sort of when we consider the clock to have started, and that we agree on it, that sort of thing. So that is all that I have for the Privacy Committee report out. Are there any questions that anyone has? Okay, well, I didn't bring multiple hats today, but perhaps I should have. I'm also reporting out for the use case ad hoc group. Again, being the being the local person that's involved, very much involved in that. Most of our status was presented yesterday, so this will be even briefer than my presentation on behalf of security. We met yesterday afternoon to further discuss use case criteria. And one of the things I want to try and point out, because it was a little bit of a point of confusion in the meeting, is that we have an initial set of use cases that we are completing. We are not trying to change the criteria for that set of use cases in midstream. What we're trying to do is trying to get ourselves sort of teed up using some lessons from this first set of use cases in order to tweak that for the next set of use cases. Some of the things that we've noticed, for example, there's one of the big factors for us has been the completeness of the use case, getting the template filled in. But beyond that, we really need somebody who is a champion for the use case, because there are going to be revisions, there are going to be questions that we have about it, and we really need the continued participation, not necessarily in all of our meetings, but the continued availability of either the author of the use case or some representative in order to help us deal with those kinds of issues, because we want to make sure that that we aren't kind of unilaterally saying, oh well, we're going to take this use case in a different direction. That's not the right thing for us to be doing. We would appreciate, we're always accepting use cases, but we would appreciate, since a couple have come in and we haven't really noticed, we need to figure out a process in order to make sure that we see the new use cases that appear. Please make sure that the use case ad hoc group is clear. If you add a new use case, at least for the time being, please tell the chair, tell the committee that we need to go and look at that. We're going to make sure that we're all set with the things that are currently on the wiki, and that's, by the way, that's of course the way that these things are submitted. We're managing all of this process on the wiki, at least to the point where we gather together a bunch of use cases and send them out for some formal reviews, in which case we've been exporting them to a Word document for that. And I think that's all that I have for use case ad hoc group. Any questions on that? Okay, back to Bob.
Thank you, Jim. If you're following along on the agenda, it is now entirely fictitious, so don't do that. Next up, we have the attributes ad hoc group report from Art Friedman.
Thank you, Bob. So I'm representing the ad hoc working group, attribute ad hoc working group, which is led by Anna Racuna-Robbins and Jerry Kickinson. Yesterday, I led a discussion on a paper entitled Attribute Assurance, and I'd like to thank everyone that participated. We actually had 20 folks, both physically in the room and virtually. The paper addresses three principal areas: accuracy, interoperability, and availability. And we talked about the concept of level of attribute assurance. So today in the room, and the people participating in the IDESG are all familiar with NIST Special Pub 863, the levels of assurance. But this concept of assurance levels for attributes really doesn't exist in a consistent way across different communities, whether you work in the federal government, state government, private sector, financial, healthcare, and so forth. And that's what we were really talking about, and that's what the intent of this paper is, to basically try to make a business case why we should have some type of standards or guidelines for establishing levels of attribute assurance or levels of confidence for attributes. Today's panel discussed attributes quite a bit. I don't know if Dave Cox is in the room, but Dave mentioned ABAC, Attribute-Based Access Control, for risk mitigation. And if you're not aware, NIST published in January a new special publication, 800-162, which addresses ABAC definition and implementation guidance. And I believe, Philip, you when we were talking about insider threat, and you talked about multi-factor authentication, how that helps. Well, that does help, but we still have problems with insider threat, and Edward Snowden is a perfect example of that. And having more dynamic access control capabilities for attributes to limit what people have access to is really needed in private sector and government. We talked about different recommendations to improve the paper. I'm not going to go over those. I'll just mention a couple things. I know Kim mentioned there's some work going on with OIX, and she provided me a paper that I'll share. And then NASPO is doing some work. Apparently that's not ready to be shared with, I guess, a broader audience yet, but at some point it will be, and those two efforts are addressing attribute assurance. So next steps, again, I'm representing this ad hoc working group. We need to go back to the working group and try to narrow the scope of our efforts to be a lot more specific on what we're trying to accomplish. I think part of our dilemma, just like other groups, we have really limited resources. Most folks are doing this on a volunteer basis. It was mentioned that it's possible there may be some funding available in the future for working groups and ad hoc groups. So if it does become available, Kim, yes, we can use some. I know it was also mentioned one of the areas that the paper that it did not address was accountability and liability. And we need to take a closer look at that. I know Jamie Clark offered to provide some legal assistance, and I want to speak with the MPO, specifically Jeremy, if we can have the ability to share some of the agreements that exist from the companies participating in the pilot efforts on what kind of liabilities those companies have. And there would be no attribution to those companies. So that's something we need to take a close look at. The paper, if you haven't read it, it's on the wiki. If you go to the attribute ad hoc group wiki, just scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page. The paper's there. I think I also want to make it available on documents, get broader distribution. Also in that paper, there's an appendix that addresses a sample or some guidance for an attribute practice statement. So again, I think that's also needed if you've done a lot of work in the PKI area and you're familiar with CPSs. This is an attempt to provide some guidance in the attribute space. I don't have anything else further I was going to talk about. If you have any questions, I'll stay up here and try to answer them. Otherwise, I'll pass the baton to the next person.
Do we have anything online, Dave?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Art. Next up, we have Andrew Hughes, who will give us the TIFTM update.
TFTM update. Kay, do you have the slides? Pseudonym. General approximation. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Hughes. I'm the vice chair of the TFTM committee. What I thought I'd do today is give you an update of what we've been doing since the last plenary. So just a quick skim by of what the work has been. We've been pretty much heads down trying to get the various deliverables going. Okay, so I'll try not to make this more than, oops, what did I just do?
Don't know.
Did I just turn it off? We would be very happy to give them up to other committees. During the last quarter, we've heard a lot from some of the other working committees, trying to start to work together more. As with many of the other coordination committees, standards and security in particular, we have started to assemble the tools that would be needed to evaluate potential participants in the ecosystem. We'll see some of those. And starting to look ahead. So as we saw in yesterday's discussion about ecosystem versus framework, TFTM is also trying to look ahead to see what might be needed, how we can support the overall mission, and try to figure out what might happen within a year, 2 years, 3 years. Okay, so the work plan from June last year that we started up, 3 primary constructs, as you can see on the slide. The identity ecosystem, the ecosystem framework, which governs the ecosystem, and the Trustmark program. Okay? These are slides that are widely available and have been available for almost a year now. So how are we going to achieve those 3 major items? What we did is we set up what we're calling work streams, coordinated group of activities and deliverables under different themes in a sequence order. We're still working through work stream 1, which is bootstrapping, right? Getting enough of a framework together, enough of an ecosystem in an understandable way, and figure out what an interim trustmark, and I'm using quotes for trustmark, what an interim trustmark program might look like. As you can see on the slides, there's further things that you might expect if you're trying to identify an ecosystem and get some sort of recognition program going. But those are a ways away. This picture is from the NPO blog entitled "Are We There Yet?" So it's one of the views of the elements that might go into the overall identity ecosystem framework. As we go forward, we and many other individuals and groups are trying to come up with the right pictures. I know we've got a collection of pictures from a year and a half ago that are still relevant, but we're trying to keep coming up with new representations until we get one that is easily explained in the, as Jack Seuss, the chair mentioned, in a 100-story elevator ride in an elevator that's going slowly, elevator pitch. So, anyways, bad joke. Okay, work stream 1, what's in it? We identified 7 deliverables in tiny type on the slide. Effectively, the idea of inventorying who's out there in trust framework-like capacities, who might be potential participants in the ecosystem, all the way from trust framework providers to relying parties and individuals and businesses. Just a survey. Some approach papers to discuss what the target might be, and some ideas and options on how we might choose to make progress there. Those are underway. You may have heard from Joe Grubbs, the TFTM 0105. Is that right? Yep. So we're well underway on that deliverable. And David Temashok has the 0106, the interim trustmark listing approach paper. So if we're going to an approval program, certification program, accreditation program, what are the pieces required for that, and what are some options going forward? Now we get some bad graphics. Okay, so this is, yeah, this one's mine. I wanted to animate it, but I decided I'd better not. So one of the I could flick back and forth between the slides, and maybe there'll be animation. So one of the things that came out of the Atlanta Plenary in January was it was clear that the pilot programs and other committees were doing valuable things, making progress within their scopes, and clearly we need to share and learn from them. So what TFTM did is over the series we have weekly meetings, and what we started to do is invite the owners of those other deliverables and efforts to come and do a show and tell, right? So what are you doing? Explain the thinking that goes into it, what are the structures, communicate with the committee so that we can try to understand what's going on. We can try to inform them of the thinking that we have, and have, obviously it's a trust framework, trust mark oriented discussion, but at least have a discussion with different points of view of the work that's going on. So the various inbound boxes are just short forms for the various presentations that we had. Should I explain what these are? I don't know. I'm not going to explain what they are. Okay.
Say that they're on the document repository.
They are actually all in the document repository. The TFTM has a full wiki site with pointers from the idecosystem.org page, and every presentation that we have is posted there. Meeting minutes are posted there as well. In fact, this slide deck was the result of me reading through the minutes and remembering what we did. Okay, so we gather all this information, we do good stuff, put it all together, and what do we get? We get some evaluation tools, I think, and this is more of my opinion what might be shaping up. So identity ecosystem participants will be evaluated in some way, shape, or form based on the techniques that IDESG develops. TFTM might produce guidance on participants that would like to align but don't know how, or want to do a self-assessment gap analysis. And there's going to be some form of compliance. It might be self-asserted compliance for organizations and entities. It might be a formal program of certification. Most likely it'll be a spectrum, but we will still have to see. Some of the outputs would be models, trust marks, and the various authority definitions. And you'll see some of the work from the other groups in that list. So the functional models and trust elements. Those are from a couple of the pilots. You see the trust marks. That's in reference to the types of things that the GTRI pilot is looking at. And in the authorities, that's from the Trust Framework Trust Mark group. And then, of course, standards from the Standards Committee. So this is an attempt to take inputs from the rest of the IDESG work, process it, recompile it in a way that makes sense within our scope, and then produce usable tools and reference things, reference models, reference implementations if we can get there. And this one's not my slide. It's horrible. It's ugly. But it wasn't me. So this is Jack's slide, and I'll speak to it. This is the overall concept that we're trying to get to. So we have current state today with just happen to have some existing trust framework providers and trust federations. We have to interact with them, deal with them. They're going to be one source of the early successes, one source of it. By fall of 2014, we start getting into the visual trust mark and the principles, maybe, the alignment with visual principles. And then maybe in fall of 2015, we get into the eventual outcome of the electronic trust mark idea or assurance mark idea. And then we move towards the vision. And that's it. So that's the last 3 months of effort. Any questions?
Yes, we have a question.
That's if you're asking, the slide is currently showing the meeting time, Colin. So if you're wondering.
I might go and sit down then. It's Colin Wallace. So the obvious thing there was that timeline doesn't seem to be now reflective of the sense of urgency that seems to have been placed on the organisation. Yeah. So, yeah, you even predicted where I was going to go with it.
Oh yeah. Part of the working plays well with others theme. is the reconciliation with the timelines that are discussed with Management Council and the board, with all chairs, synchronizing the work plan. It's perhaps convenient that I'm vice chair-elect of the plenary, so be able to help suggest ways to move forward. You can read the slide. If we, as with all groups, we do enjoy more participants. We're fairly active, but because we're deliverable focused in our work, the participation shifts, right? So every week we have 2 one-hour segments available, and we post up whose deliverable is being discussed on that week. And there's other side meetings that are arranged separately, but during the weekly calls, we'll have a discussion about whatever the topic of the week is. And they're good. So if you want to talk about, if you see a topic that's of interest to you, just join the call. See what we talk about. The core group is maybe 15 or 20, and we're getting used to each other, or we've gotten used to each other, so the discussions are richer now than they were at the beginning. So they're good talks. Any other questions?
Anything online?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Speaking of sense of urgency, we have our newest chair, the User Experience Working Group, newly reconstituted and reinvigorated, has selected Mary Hodder to chair the activity, and she already has something to report to us. I think, a week and a half into the job or something like that? It's less than 24 hours. Oh, less than 24 hours. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, so all y'all need to follow Mary's example. Mary.
Okay. I know. There's slides coming because we had to do slides. I know. I did slides in less than 24 hours.
There's a clicker up on that.
Okay. All right. And we just click forward and back. Okay. Cool. Highly usable. Very usable clicker. Okay, so first of all, I'm Mary Hodder, and I've been a member of IDESG since, I think, the beginning, August, 20 months ago or so. But I've sort of sat in the background a bit on a number of committees and was part of the UX and Usability Committee. And just a quick bit of history, we did meet and did do some activities, including write a draft charter through around November 2012. I'm actually going to show you something from that, which will give you a sense of what we think our mission is here. But we've picked it back up. Yesterday we met, and we did 2 things. We went through the draft charter. We've agreed that we're going to spend 10 days getting feedback from the group on the email list, and then when that's finished, barring any big problems, we're going to turn it over to the Management Council. I think that's the correct order of activity. So the other thing we did was an election, and I was elected chair. Mark Dupree was elected vice chair, and Steve Brock is our secretary. So we're here to help. We're the Usability and User Experience Group, and hopefully we can find good ways to help out with the various projects that are going on. That said, I actually just wanted to give a really brief overview based on that document that we put together in November 2012 about what we do. So I'm going to quickly go through this list, but you can find the list in the November 2012 draft charter, which is in documents in the IDESG website. So our goal is to facilitate, so UXC, first of all, is User Experience Committee. And UXC is charged with facilitating implementation of UX and accessibility aspects of the identity ecosystem. And so we take that to partly mean some things that go on with the website and things that we need to do for folks who come to talk to us. We would provide review in theory. I'm going to say all of this is actually in theory because we have to start to formulate what our priorities are and figure out what's useful. But we'll provide reviews for products, plans, designs, different groups and committees that are creating work product. Yesterday, somebody suggested that we take a look at the framework that is being proposed and we we maybe potentially make that our first thing. I will say that given that our group hasn't met past yesterday, that we're going to have to talk about what activities we do, but I think that was a good suggestion by one of the members yesterday. We're going to look for solutions, UX solutions, user experience solutions, issues, gaps in what we do, and provide some evaluation, methods, tools, processes, that sort of thing. We also think that we can provide information, insight, and reference about user experience and what that means and how to apply it. How to be better privacy enabling, that sort of thing from a user experience point of view. And we could embark on some research for committees if requested, or if we decided together that that was a useful activity. We can certainly work on some evangelism both for IDESG generally out to the community, and we can do some user experience evangelism for user experience professionals to come in and help, because we actually think that this list is incredibly comprehensive, and I mean, a couple of people could work full-time on IDESG projects, and all of us are volunteers. Lastly, there's, of course, the liaison issue. We would like to provide liaisons to different committees, and so we'll work to do that. That will probably come up in our first meeting, our first call. So that said, we also anticipate providing just general support and explaining what user experience and usability are. From my own perspective, this is not the perspective of the group necessarily, but my perspective on user experience is that it's about the emotional attachment somebody has to a particular thing, a product, a digital experience. It can be this clicker. If I love it, that's a user experience kind of modality. Whereas usability is a question of whether or not something is usable. Does it make sense? So those are two different things, and that's how I see those two disciplines. But otherwise, the tools to create usability or user experience things are often very, very similar. So I also wanted to share what we kind of think is outside of our user experience committee scope. So I'm just going to read this. Marketing. While it's a key factor in what we do in an overall user experience, we want to have good user experience. The better it is, the better we're going to be able to market what we do. It's also not our core responsibility or experience. User experience is not right in the middle of marketing. It kind of sits alongside. So we plan to participate with other committees who are doing a kind of marketing, and we're available. For example, let's say somebody wanted to do a focus group. We know how to do focus groups, but you may have a particular subject matter that you're experts in, and so we would welcome a request to hosts or help with some kind of usability or user experience work. And so we invite that. So I just want to make that distinction. And the second thing is, at one point or another in the discussion around the UX committee, there was some notion that some folks had that we might actually be designers who would create some icons for trust marks. And we sort of wanted to throw out there that while we're really interested in ease of use and usability around anything that we create, the different working group or committee email lists, there's not always the possibility of cross-posting. So I would say send me an email and we'll see if we can't get some cross-committee work going. Peter, do you have a question? Just
go ahead. No,
Peter Brown. I'm speaking as an individual member, not in any official capacity. But I have two questions. Right at the outset, in rolling back to Chicago, when we set up and scoped various committees, one idea that came up was we've got these 4 guiding principles within INSTIC, and we ought to have 4 committees, almost sort of like gating the work that was going forward, ensuring usability and user experience. Different profiles of users have challenges or questions about certain types of device. If you're an anonymous or pseudonymous user, you may not want to use a mobile device because there are ways of tracking who you are or what you are because of that. Somebody may be visually impaired and not be able to use a small device, and they want, so there's certain design issues. Aside just design issues, are you looking at issues about appropriateness of interface and interaction for dealing with some of the identity assertion and other aspects of the work we're doing, that are making recommendations even about what might be more or less appropriate to different types of audiences?
Okay, so the first question, which was about would we have some kind of a
sort of methodology or something like
methodology, a set of heuristics maybe, or some kind of a document that is similar? I'm assuming to the PEM, which I don't recall exactly. It's the privacy evaluation methodology. Okay. Good. So we could, in theory, create a document like that and essentially have it be a series of heuristics that different projects that we work on here in IDESG could pass through, and we could let people know. It's always better to do usability and user experience work before you start versus after. I would say that probably everyone in our group is really pro doing that versus slapping the usability on at the end. Right. Nobody likes that. So that's a great idea. So I would say, we'll take it up in the meeting and see if we can if we can figure out a useful way to do that would help the group. Okay. The second question, it was about user experience and usability and different devices. So I think that we certainly could address devices and whatnot. My purpose for sharing my own perspective on the difference between usability and user experience was to make the point that while the tools are the same, they're close together, but they're slightly different. So we're using these words, right? The name of the committee is user experience, and it could be usability just as well, right? To some extent, they're somewhat interchangeable, in my view. So, but that said, I think that we can absolutely apply both perspectives to different devices and figure out, the whole point of doing user experience or usability work is to figure out which things work on which devices for which people. And, ideally, again, if we had all the time and resources in the world in this group, we could put something together that did an amazing job. We could do all 9 of those things, fully, and it would be great. But we are volunteers, and who knows how we get maybe the extra help that we might need going forward to do, let's say, a particular usability study that would lead to exactly what you're talking about, which is a set of guidelines about pushing for different devices or in different contexts and circumstances.
So just as an additional element, one of the things I was thinking about, for example, and I think we did discuss this in Chicago, was the ability of the committee to act as a focal point or a forum for reaching out to, many of the software and hardware companies that many of us are familiar with, and the devices we have very significant user experience professionals and teams working on this, how the committee could work with them, not only in terms of looking at the different devices and types of interaction, but also the constituencies that you're trying to address to ensure that you're covering usability from different, sort of focus groups or different types of audience.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really important thing to do, and it would be great to figure out the best way to do that within the bounds of what we're doing, because early on, one thing that a couple of the other committees that I was sort of a liaison to asked for was to do sort of exactly that, to go out and ask, like, why is one or another company or individual not participating here? Do they know about it? What's going on? And I think our conclusion was that the the communications committee needed to lead that. And so, maybe the right thing to do is to go to the comm committee and say, okay, we're really interested in reaching out to user experience professionals. Can we work with you and do that?
Thank you very much, Mary. So, last but not least, we have our host, Adam Madeline, to give us two different updates. The first one... he has... that'll be $10, please. Adam has three updates for us. We have security functional model and taxonomy, we have standards adoption criteria, and we have a committee report out to be named later. Adam.
Third was... hi, everybody. I'm Adam Madeline. I'm the chair of the Security Committee. I am going to try and not talk very much, and so this is going to be a brief update and not to be overly explanatory. We did meet on Monday on the most interesting area around the functional model. But so I am going to report out, and I'm trying to do it in the right order that will enable conversation. So I am the chair of the Security Committee. I have for the past year also led the Taxonomy Ad Hoc Group. I'm also a frequent member of the TFTM Committee and the Standards Committee, and any other time permitting, listen in on other relevant topics. So being that there are no other Standards Committee members here, I've been asked to just give a Standards Coordination Committee update who met this week. And unfortunately, I have an email here that I'm going to read. It's 2 paragraphs worth, because I did not participate in the meeting, but as a member, I've been asked to do it. And so I'm going to ask for anyone else that did, if there are some questions or things that I might get wrong. So Jamie Clark did lead a meeting this week, and I was not able to attend, but he shared his notes, and here they are. The SCC, Standards Coordination Committee, met for the principal purpose of reviewing the composite draft of their standards adoption policy, which has been a major effort of theirs for the last 6 months. Which would, if adopted by the plenary, give IDESG a structure for evaluating whether any data specification used in a proposed or endorsed identity ecology system is an open standard, having the kind of access, availability, and stability that makes it appropriate for broad use in the standards-based systems envisioned by the national strategy. In addition, we discussed the pivotal and important role of evaluating the relevance and suitability of a standard in the IDESG and NSTIC principles. It won't be too long. The discussion is ongoing, and we all discussed important issues around the standard affordability. The committee is close to a final draft, but some policy points and new text required one more round of comments and revision, which we hope to complete during the month of April. So watch for announcements on the standards adoption policy. First paragraph. The other topic is we also heard from representatives of the pilot project coordination group, and I believe that was representatives from the IDESG pilot who are represented here, so please speak up if I misstate anything. So they brought a request to the SCC for help with finding appropriate SDOs, Standards Development Organizations, that can be developed or modify standards for use to address some specific functionality that the pilots would like to fulfill with open standards. We expect that the volume of this kind of gap request and community efforts to stream out unfulfilled IDESG requirements and gaps for SDOs to address will increase as IDESG workflow increases. And we'll be reviewing the specific request in upcoming meetings. So my understanding is that they see a lot of value in doing that and are open to other requests of that sort. Did I get that right? Okay. So, do you want
to ask if there are questions or comments on that report?
Sure. Anybody have any questions for standards? And I might have to get others involved. Yes, so that might be on the listserv. We will put it on the standards listserv. How's that? Okay, so what I am actually, so I'm going to do a very brief update on the Security Committee functional model. Not intended to be a description in detail, so I would encourage anybody who has questions to, we can follow up. There's a lot of information available. If you recall, at the last plenary in Atlanta, we did share the first version of the functional elements. So the Security Committee's primary objective that we have to reminding ourselves is to develop a security evaluation methodology. I believe it was last summer or last fall we took on the responsibility to develop the functional model because we saw that as a critical stepping stone to get to the security evaluation methodology, and as well as that it was an important deliverable and tool for the whole ecosystem. So we've really been focused for 4 to 5 months on that, and in the last quarter we have made a significant update, and I'll discuss that. So the first point is that our overall objective is a functional model, but we have shared, we have a working, available functional elements model, which is one component of the whole functional model. It is not, so to try and avoid confusion, we're using the term functional elements. Okay, there is more work on the functional model, but it is to a state where it can be shared and used by committees, by pilots, by internal and external, however, and we've went about to enhance it and get feedback, and I'll just tell you a little bit about the steps that we did. So you see the link that where you can, we have transitioned all of our content to the wiki. That is the most current. There is some old artifacts on the file depot, but I encourage anybody to go to the wiki, and we are doing a pretty good job of keeping it up to date and with all the meeting minutes, all the content we're sharing, and we've been doing a good job over the last quarter to stay on top of that. So it is a component. It is not the entire functional model. There's more work to be done. Over the last quarter, we completed what we consider a good chunk of work to update it and to collaborate with committee feedback that we requested and brought into the functional element design. We assigned use case gap analysis and worked with the use case ad hoc group. So we did quite a bit of collaboration across committees to release the update that we have, and we did just share it on Tuesday. I'm losing track of time. It's been a long week already. So if you haven't seen it, this is what it looks like. It's on the wiki. It has a companion document, which is called the Functional Elements Matrix, which describes all of these core operations and functions that make up the functional elements. And we've been calling it the functional elements deliverable. No, I want to go back. Sorry. So the approach we took was we've been also updating the dashboard regularly. We have an approach, but we have been focused on the next task. And so we are at a point now where we are, as a committee, working through the next key accomplishments, key milestones we need to achieve over the next quarter. And it's worked for us. So we have an overriding plan, but we are now, with this release of the functional elements, need to finalize our activities over the next several months. We meet weekly on Thursday afternoons. and have quite a bit of participation and good conversation and contributions. I encourage anybody to participate. So we are. So I mentioned on step 2 that there are some proposals on the table on how to complete the overall functional model, and based on the framework and discussions that Peter and Kim initiated yesterday, we are going to be taking in, potentially updating our plan and taking the next steps. And we're focused on collaboration across committees, but very much moving it forward. And so it's still a work in process, not a final product. It is not going to be submitted to the plenary for approval at this phase. When there is a full functional model available and vetted and with all the appropriate input and updates and feedback, then it will go through an approval process. But with some of the new deadlines that are being proposed, there might be some reconsideration of the plan over the next short period of time. So, and I'll get to you in a sec. So I encourage anybody to get at it. It's available to look at, and we have a very active listserv and wiki site with a lot of information, and with all our minutes and with the meeting information and so forth. So that's what I wanted to say on functional elements. Security Committee has much more work to do. We're completing this and starting our larger task related to security evaluation methodology and trying to sort that out in parallel. If you saw on the Kim's chart yesterday, our committee was mentioned in quite a few of those blocks. So there's a lot of work going on, and we certainly can use help. So I'll take a question.
So I was in the meeting, I asked a question, I'm reflecting on the answer, and I'm confused. So as I recall, in defining this organization, there was a set of questions asking how do diverse participants like entrepreneurs participate. And there was an intention to include them because they're on the edge of the market and they're innovative and they're not giant companies and they're an important part of the conversation. I then asked where personal clouds fit, and the answer was everywhere, which was like a great answer. And I said, I'd love to have the entrepreneurs that I represent and I am connected to contribute and participate and set up an hour or maybe a couple calls where they engage with this. But I'm pretty clear none of them are going to join the committee and participate in an ongoing way for a long period of time because they are, by their very nature, entrepreneurs building their own companies. So then I was told that there would be no special treatment for anybody, and the way to collaborate, as I heard the answer coming back, was to join the committee. So I'm confused about how we engage with groups we've specifically articulated we would like their engagement with, and I offered a path to do so, and I really would love to see them engage, and I'm not sure how to do it now. And maybe we take this offline, but basically the answer to my offer I heard back was no, which is okay then, but I'm confused.
And then have some further dialogue. So there's a constituency that you indicate. So personal cloud, there are some entrepreneurs on the committee. No, I don't want to say it like that. This is a living document. We are open to input. We have a mission to do, and we all can bring things to the table, and we have to figure out how to bring it to the table and make it happen. And, being all volunteers, we are open to contribute. And so we would welcome that perspective, but we need somebody else to help make that happen.
Yes, I'll address this a bit later because and Kim and I were discussing this issue yesterday.
So go ahead to the non-contentious part of the presentation. Taxonomy. So we've also, over the last year, been pursuing the taxonomy work. The first thing I want to share, so we've completed a chunk of work, and we are going on a hiatus. And we are looking for a new person to lead that function. So I am going to be relinquishing those responsibilities. But we did complete a good chunk of work, and we have, I think, is the first official. Yeah, thank you. We are the first. This is the first official deliverable that is going to be submitted through the full IDESG approval process, and we are most of the way through that. We have a what we're calling glossary, IDESG glossary version 1, which is a significant, massive document of 7 terms. But it was quite a bit of work, and it was quite enlightening, and there was a tremendous amount of effort put in on a weekly basis for over a year to get to that point. And I don't want to put it down, belittle that effort. It was a significant contribution by a whole lot of people, and a lot of input and perspectives were considered. So why does it keep dropping?
I'll take care of it.
There's a ledge here.
Oh, just keep going.
So anyway, the ad hoc group has completed a version, submitted to our chartering committee called Standards Committee, then ran it through the full privacy approval process and the Management Council approval. And so there is a glossary available for the IDESG on the taxonomy wiki page with, no, I'm not going to remove it from my hand. So there is some next actions that we are going to initiate a dialogue here today about, but before we do that, I just want to describe the process, where we've left it, and then where it's potentially the next person might take it up. So glossary version 1 is available on the wiki. We did approve within the ad hoc group several additional terms for the IDESG taxonomy group. And there are very interesting terms that were talked about today. The anonymous interaction term has been adopted by the ad hoc group, no further approvals. So our proposal is out there on the wiki. And in closing, what we've done is, so here's the terms of the glossary. It's not intended to be reviewed, but just as an artifact to show everybody. We are implementing a process for the next phase of it. We are going into what we're calling an on-demand mode, and so we put a lot of sweat and energy into where we have here, and now what we want to transition to is a mode where we make sure we're addressing the ad hoc group going forward is addressing the terms that all of you need to have addressed. So we are in the process. This has been approved by our ad hoc group and is in the process of being posted to the wiki for anybody to have access to read with a bunch of supporting information relative to it. And so I'm not going to go through it, but these are the steps that we are proposing that the ad hoc group going forward follows. So additional terms can be submitted. The key thing that we wanted to initiate a dialogue about today is what are the key next steps with the glossary? What levels of additional approvals are appropriate and necessary? And is this a deliverable of the IDESG that will go external to the IDESG or just be a tool used internally to committee work and whoever else, other work of the IDESG? So I think Bob was going to say a few words about how we maneuver through that dialogue.
Right. And since we're short on time, I don't want to have the discussion in the room here today, but let me describe to you the issues. Okay, so there are basically 3 issues that prevent us from putting forward a motion to adopt this piece of work today. The first is that we no longer have a quorum, which makes a submission moot. But the other 2 are more substantive. One of them is this is intended to be a living document, and it's going to have things added to it, right? So we have a discussion that we have to have about at what point we decide that it is appropriate to take a snapshot and turn it into an official thing. I don't think the question is, are 7 terms enough? I think the question is, what is the scope of things that need to be described to form a coherent whole so that we can feel confident that we're putting something out there which will live for a while as a draft without people coming to us and saying it's not complete. So that's a discussion that we have to have. The other discussion that we have to have is a much larger discussion, and a defect of our current rules is that they require a plenary approval vote for a deliverable of the IDESG, but unfortunately they omit to define what is the difference between a deliverable and something that isn't a deliverable. So we need to have a discussion about internal documents versus deliverables and what the intention of deliverables is, and what our recommendation to the public is. If we adopt something as a deliverable, is that a recommendation to the government or a recommendation to the public, or what exactly is it? And so those are a couple of issues that, and this is, by the way, this isn't like the fault of this activity. It's just that this activity happens to have completed while we're still in this state of confusion, and it has held a mirror up to ourselves in which we can see this confusion. So, so we need to resolve that set of issues. I do want to say, I think I want to echo Adam and say this has been, as always, definitions, those are easy, right? No, definitions are always the hardest thing, and it's been an enormous amount of work. A lot of people have put a lot of very hard work into it, and I think it's a good piece of work, and I want to thank everybody who participated and Adam for it. And I do want to encourage someone, and any y'all, don't all raise your hands at the same time, but somebody to, to volunteer to take this forward, because it will continue to be important work in the future. Andrew is shaking his head no. I guess he's not volunteering. So we're going to wrap up in just a second, but do we? Oh, okay. Adam would like to add something.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming to Symantec in wrapping, and that's why I asked to be last on the agenda. So we really appreciate everybody coming, and hope you had a good experience. And it was good to bring, and my company really received value from it, and I got a lot of support, even though they didn't show up here very much, to enable this. I'm based in Virginia, and this is an entirely different group, different function. We had to go through a lot to make it happen. But I just want to thank everybody for coming, and hopefully you had a good event, good week here this week. So there was some requests for some of the keynote presentation information that we are willing to share. So I'm going to find a way to make it available, but I will take some specific requests. If anybody wants the presentation that was shared on Tuesday, we can provide it under certain. It's available. I just have to distribute it and give you some guidelines for it for your use. So, thank you, everybody.
And that's a perfect tie into what I wanted to say before we go to a very short break. By the way, I do want to encourage you to stay around. There are a couple of important things in new business, so if you don't absolutely have to make it to the airplane, please do stay around for a minute. So I want to thank Adam in particular and Symantec in general. They put a lot of resources and effort into hosting us here. The meeting has gone very well, and the breaks and other social entertainment are very much appreciated. So thanks, Adam, for hosting us. It was another in a tradition of excellent meetings, and we really appreciate it. Also, thanks to Sandra Rios at the reception desk and Oscar Paredes, who has been providing facility support to us from Symantec, invaluable assistance. And opening the door. And thanks also to the audiovisual team, Jerry, Greg, Dave, and Joe in the back here, and John, I left someone out, yes, who have been supporting us and who have been making it as a good experience for the online audience. One more announcement. So someone that most of you are used to being in the background providing technical support from the Secretariat, Laura Barman, isn't here with us today, and that's not an accident. She will be having her baby in early May, and she certainly won't be returning soon from that activity, and she may not be returning to support us in the future. So I think it's entirely appropriate to thank Laura for everything she's done for us. She's been one of the real strengths of the organization. organization, and we very much appreciate everything Laura has done to us. Sorry, for us. And so if you have an issue of the sort that you have formerly addressed to Laura, you can in the future email administrator@idecosystem.org. That's an alias which will get you to the appropriate interim people until the new Laura is announced in due course. So with that, let's take about a 5-minute break here and come back for the new business and closing sessions. And I do encourage you to stay for new business. Thanks. And thanks to all of the committee chairs for their presentations.
It's a day of clouds and darkness, like a shroud it covers me. I take comfort on a life well lived will set my spirits free. Your light will always shine.
Okay, and we're back. If y'all could please wrap up your conversations and have a seat. We will try to finish this as quickly as possible in the interest of making sure that everybody gets onto the excellent U.S. air transport system in time. Okay, everyone. Yeah, I tried that and it didn't work. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Okay, if you were in the dentist chair, you would be asleep by now. Okay, one short item of old business before we get to the new business. I'll pass it off to Kim to make good on an obligation she undertook yesterday.
Thanks, Bob. So just real quickly, one of the things that we talked about yesterday when we were presenting the framework ecosystem presentation was trying to get feedback from people. And so what Peter and I have done is we've updated the slide deck to include some additional content that we thought would be really helpful. And then we also are going to we're going to send out all of the presentation, make it available for everybody. But then we're going to ask you to please share any feedback with your stakeholder representative or your committee, if you're active in any specific committee, your committee chair, and that information can then get funneled back through us. So you have more than one channel. And we've done this before to get feedback. So, but I really think it's really important for us to have that framework feedback and that framework for us to work from. I think of the microphone often as kind of my therapy couch. So yesterday, as I was talking to others, I realized that I have trust issues. And I think that having this framework is kind of important. So for me, here's the example. When I put my address into a GPS to get directions, I can't drive when I hit start. I have to hit the overview first and see where it's taking me. Then I can go. Well, it's the same thing with this, right? If we have the framework that we're all agreeing on, we all feel like we're not just doing our activities for naught. You know, we're doing our activities taking us somewhere. So, like I said, it's kind of my therapy. So we'll give you, please give your feedback in, because it's really important to make sure that we're all in agreement on where we're headed. Thank you.
Next time I'm letting her navigate. Okay, so we have a few items of new business. So first, do we have Daza online and able to speak to us on the phone? We're pointing here. Are we able to hear Daza? Evidently not. While we attempt to get Daza on the phone, let's see if we can switch the order up a little bit. Is Joe Grubbs in the room? Joe. Okay, we have an item from Joe Grubbs on engaging stakeholder communities. Joe.
Perfect. And I don't know if it's possible. There was just a couple of slides to go with this. One slide in particular. It's not surprising that it has to do with me, so I own that.
Oh, sure. Just make a quick comment, and this may have been mentioned already during the week, but I think it's worth reiterating. One of the issues we had a couple of months ago about when new bits of work come up and people don't know where to go with it, and a couple of presenters earlier mentioned about, the committees working in silos. We agreed that one part of the solution would be to have a very specific mailing list, and which we've now set up, which is the new work items proposal mailing list. And the idea there is that even if new items are proposed now or between plenaries, there is a specific place to act as a sort of incubator for getting new items going. So what I would encourage is anybody who's, including yourselves now, introducing new items, that they write that up a little bit on that mailing list, which is open to everybody. And I don't know if everyone's automatically subscribed. It's easy to subscribe. And that can serve as a sort of incubator for getting new ideas going. And then as that sort of matures and gets socialized, that can be then the point to decide, well, is this a new activity in an existing committee? Do we need a new committee for this? Do we need to take this to management?
voter turnout, if you will, for some of the recent rounds of elections. And my background, for many of you who don't know, most of you probably don't know, my background is actually in community-based planning, urban planning, community-based redevelopment activities, working with diverse stakeholder groups at a neighborhood level on redevelopment efforts and economic development, community-based economic development. So as Jack was talking, I kind of went back to my roots in that field, and I was, of course, everyone who's worked in community-based planning or any type of community-driven, citizen-driven effort has heard the name Saul Alinsky. So as Jack was talking, I was sort of thinking, what would Saul Alinsky do? And I want to excuse myself for borrowing the title of a Sufjan Stevens song. So pardon me for doing that. But the concept and what we know about community organizing, I think, has a role to play with how the IDESG can engage the stakeholder communities. And so I realize that by turning this next slide and offering some recommendations, I'm probably volunteering myself to help support this, and that's okay. But Kay, if you could turn or someone turn to the next slide. So basically, Saul Alinsky wrote a book some time ago called Rules for Radicals, okay? And it was just that. It was about how to go out, how to engage people where they live, get them involved, and how to build coalitions to make change happen. Within some cases at a neighborhood level, some cases institutional level, but basically how to energize a population for positive change. Okay, whether it's an affirmative step or whether it's battling something that is viewed to be a negative. And I want to take very much the first of those. So basically recognizing an opportunity here with the stakeholder communities, recognizing the critical role that stakeholder communities have in the IDESG, and just offering just some reflections based on what would Saul Alinsky do about how to more effectively engage the stakeholder communities. I have had the opportunity to work actually hands-on doing, as I mentioned, neighborhood-based planning, neighborhood-based redevelopment activities. I worked with community coalitions in the city of Orlando to totally have a citizen-centric and citizen-driven overhaul of the city government's enterprise zone program to make it more appropriate at a neighborhood level instead of just tax incentives to take resources and assets out of a community to actually infuse resources into a community. So a very exciting effort there. And through processes like that, you come away with a couple of lessons learned. So these are really sort of lessons learned, reflecting on generations, centuries, I guess, of community organizing, community practice that have been formalized over the last 100 years. First of all, what you want to do, and this is, again, some recommendations, and please don't, for those of you who have been involved in this with the IDESG, this was not intended as a statement about something that the IDESG has been doing wrong. I'll be honest with you, I've not been involved, so I don't know what's been going on. These are just kind of reflections on what has been found to work and what has been found not to work in engaging community groups. But first, to identify community leaders who will be rabble-rousers. Okay, not just representatives, not just people to serve in more of a Republican type of way to represent a particular community, but people who will be out rabble-rousing, organizing, getting the word out, bringing people together, building coalitions. Okay, so active engagement, active, proactive engagement with folks who are ready to roll up the shirt sleeves and actually get work done. Second, cast the net widely, often, and most importantly, for substantive work. So often, stakeholder communities are engaged only when specific input is needed on a specific item. Okay, and that's why you'll find die-off in true community involvement, is because the community starts to feel like I'm just being brought in to legitimate decisions that have already been made. And so casting the net widely, often, and for substantive work is a way to co-produce with stakeholder communities the solutions that you're driving for. And that concept of co-production is critical. Okay? By substantive work, it means, as much as possible, have the stakeholder communities driving this, not just on the solution, but helping to frame what the problems are, what the issues are, what the needs are. Okay, so there is sort of a statement in public policy circles that if you let me frame the question, I'll give you all the choice that you need to make the answers, right? But engaging the communities in framing what needs to happen, how it needs to happen, and getting that co-production, again, it's a major step. Engaging through ongoing active dialogue. Not waiting for elections, not waiting for input opportunities, but an ongoing dialogue around the very work, the very basis of the IDESG. Any type of community-driven thing, objective, is going to benefit from this type of ongoing, active engagement. Building coalitions around member-based priorities. When I say member-based, I mean members of the stakeholder community. A lot of times you'll hear people say, well, so-and-so or such and such, that community is acting just in self-interest. Well, that's not always a bad thing. Self-interest is a reflection of what the priorities are. Okay, so if you can build coalition around those self-interested items, you'll find a lot of people who are passionate about the work they're doing. And the challenge then is, how do you bring that together? How do you bring that together? So it's not just a set of decisions made on just limited self-interest, but you're building coalitions around that, and you're getting a community of voices participating in a shared dialogue and again, a co-produced solution. Lead by following, listening to the community and ensuring that outcomes from the IDESG reflect community priorities. This is one of the biggest lessons learned in any type of community-based activity. If you engage a community, and you listen, and you get the input from the community, and all of a sudden it goes through the black box, and what comes out on the other side looks nothing like what the community was telling you its priorities were, or what its perspective was. Not that that's going to be the only factor. There are other factors, but at least make sure that there is a reflection of the time and energy that the community put into that process on what comes out the other end. Because that's vital. That builds legitimacy in the process. That legitimates every bit of input that the community of interest has in that process. And it is a major down payment toward stronger, collaborative, co-producing relationships moving into the future. And then finally, establishing dedicated roles in the IDESG for stakeholder communities. Again, a co-produced ecosystem. The IDESG is very clear in recognizing the importance of stakeholder communities. And the question here is, can the IDESG at multiple levels find dedicated, clearly established, institutionalized roles for those stakeholder communities to play? Because finding those, again, will lead to that type of co-produced solution. So just a couple of reflections from years of community-based planning, community organizing, and building coalitions for positive change that I just want to put out there.
Thanks, Joe. Stay up here for a minute, would you? I'm not going to ask for questions right now because what I was going to say is in some sense part two of what Joe just said. So I'm going to do that first, and then I'll ask for a discussion afterward. So this is in a certain sense my swan song, right? I get to give a speech before I retire, and I was reflecting all week on what the most important one thing I could say as I leave is, and I think it's this. I want to try to answer the question, why is one person's voice important? So we're not a voting organization. We're a consensus organization. It doesn't mean unanimity, but it does mean that when almost everybody in the room agrees and somebody stands up and says, wait, I got a problem with that, we listen, and we don't just listen and say, okay, now we've heard you and we're going to overrule you, right? We have to listen and learn. And the reason this is so important for us is Andy Osment came and told us at the last meeting about how this is a national priority for the White House and the government. We are representing the people of the United States, but we are not demographically representative. So Tom Sullivan talked earlier today about undocumented migrant farm workers and their health care needs. They're not in the room here. We spoke earlier in aesthetics' session about whistleblowers. They're not in the room here either. There are a lot of people in the United States with no fixed address. They're not in the room here. Maybe they don't even have the identification documentation you would need to get into NIST or to get in here. Although Adam has helpfully accommodated us on this. Raise your hand if you're a covert operative for an intelligence agency. Yeah, okay. They probably aren't in here. It's a little hard to tell. So what that means, among other things, is that if all of us in here have an opinion and one person stands up and expresses a contrary opinion, we don't know whether that represents 100,000 or 1 million people who aren't in the room. But we'll find out if we make a decision and we roll out a system which doesn't meet their needs. But we'll only find out after it's too late and after the government has spent the money and after we have foreclosed other alternatives. So we have to be very, very careful as we go forward to make sure, number one, that whenever one of these issues is raised, we not only listen, but we take care to listen in other languages, right? We're all familiar, or most of us are familiar with the language of identity and of technology and of public policy. There are a lot of other languages out there that we don't speak, and people are speaking to us in those languages, and they expect us to listen to them and to understand what's being said before we start to translate them into actions. So we need to be very careful, not to have our first instinct be to argue and not to have our first instinct be to contradict. We need to listen and assimilate these things. And the other important part of that is, so sometimes there'll be one person in the room and sometimes there will be 0 people in the room. And this is what Joe's talking about. And it's necessarily true, right? We cannot get every interested constituency into this room. I don't mean that they won't fit, although maybe they won't fit into this particular room. What I mean is that it's not socially or logistically or economically possible to get all of the people who have these concerns to come to us. And so we are going to have to come to them. I had this conversation with Kim yesterday, and it's a concern. It's been a concern of mine for a while. We were too busy trying to get the organization to simply function to do it before, but we do now have to do it, and I know it's one of her highest priorities. And I was really happy to hear Joe give this advice. So I guess so in conclusion, I'll just say I hope going forward that if you'll take one piece of advice from me as a legacy, it's to listen to the one voice and listen to the 0 voices. So I'll ask for a little bit of discussion of this. And by the way, Daza, are you on the call at this point?
Yes, I am. I am here.
Okay, so we'll have Daza give us his presentation after we have a few comments or discussion of Joe's and mine.
I actually have a comment on this, but also an apology because I'm going to have to leave in about 5 minutes. So I think I'd just like to give a couple of comments now on this in particular. I think you nailed it, and thanks, Joe, for sort of bringing this up and socializing it. One of the things I was uncomfortable about in the role of the management council, we say, okay, we've got all these representatives from stakeholder categories, has been from the beginning. And I remember the discussion we had in Chicago about, are these the right groups? Are we sure we're not, overrepresenting some, underrepresenting others? And of course the answer was, we don't know. And one of the things we do have now is an organization that can do something about this, which maybe 2 years ago we didn't have. So this is probably the right sort of time to start talking about this. And the other thing is that I wanted to mention was, in this context, we should not assume that the only way to get people heard that are not in the room is through a process of evangelization and ensuring that they become members and join. We've got to have mechanisms, whether it's through, and various people, I've had various discussions one-to-one and in small groups during the week about this, about the possibility of us looking both in our formal processes, and that's why I wanted to mention it now, because of this offsite that we're going to be having in 3 weeks of the Management Council, of both within the formal processes and outside of that, how we can organize some aspects of our work to be able to say, okay, either you're not in the room, you're not in the organization, and maybe you don't want to be in the organization, but we're going to come to you and find where we can get some input and answers to some of our questions. So whether it's been on questions like on pseudonymity and anonymity, there may be very, very legitimate concerns for a lot of people who don't want to reveal their identity, saying, look, actually, I'm not comfortable with joining your organization, and that's fine. But that doesn't mean we're not on the hook to say, well, look, we're discussing issues which are going to impact on you, so we have an obligation to reach out and say, these are the issues which this is our take on what the issues are. Give us what you think about it. So we have that sort of interaction, and we take responsibility for what we do in taking that forward. And I think what we're trying to do is identify which are the sort of target demographics. I don't want to formalize the term too much, but the fora and the groups into which we think there are elements which are missing that we need to pull that in. It's on that. And at the end of the plenaries, we tend to have a sort of wrap both from myself and from the plenary chair about our comments and ideas of what's gone on in the week. And I think I wanted to actually not say much more than that, to say that I think we've got to a stage of organizational maturity that we're now in a position where we're able to do stuff that we wouldn't have been able to do 2 years ago. And now we've got that self-confidence. We've got to make sure that self-confidence doesn't tip over to arrogance in assuming that the only way to do this is come on board and get inside our organization because we're the ones who are going to fix it all, but rather to say we're never going to be perfect, and we've got to find and be very clear to fill in exactly the sort of gaps that you've both mentioned. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Travel safely. So we have one more new business item. So Daza, you're live. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. This item is a follow-up. Sorry about that. I was on mute. This is a follow-up from a conversation that Bob and I had about about some unfinished business, I guess we could call it, which is, in this case, domain names. And Bob, let me just check. Is my signal coming through?
We can hear you fine, and your slides are up.
Oh, there's slides? Okay. Great.
It's a slide that says Daza Greenwood, IDESG.org designation. It's very pretty.
Okay, it is. Oh, now I see it. That's great. Thanks. So there's good news, which is that I went ahead and got some domain names, and I'd said at some plenary meetings in the past that I'd like to transfer them to the organization. And Bob and I, when we were talking it through, realized names are a big part of identity. And having a plenary sense of whether you would want these domain names or not, and plenary statement of some sort to have a transfer and to take property of some kind, in this case a domain name, has some benefit, and it's also an opportunity to exercise some dialogue on what the identity of the group is. So, at any rate, at its simplest level, I've got some domain names, and I offered to transfer them to the group. And and they are IDESG.org, but also IDESG.com and .us and IDESGIA.com and .org when we decided to create a trade association that has that moniker. And so, Bob, I'll leave it to you in terms of structuring the dialogue. But what we had talked about generally was opening a conversation on whether the end of which might be the plenary expressed interest in receiving the domain names and in having them provisioned somewhere so that they could potentially be used for committee and for other IDESG business in the future. So that's what we have, Bob, and I'll leave it to you to help us dialogue on how best to go forward with the transition.
Well, so thanks very much, Daza. And we're in this unique position, right? We have now incorporated, so we are IDESG Inc. But we've incorporated in a state where we still are receiving outside financial support and have no direct revenues of our own. So we have this, I think, sort of unique opportunity. We could actually, if we chose to, maybe actually do an electronic deliberation and make a vote. And I think the reason to do that would be symbolically nice to have the first asset of the IDESG be an identity. So I would like to sort of support Daza's suggestion that maybe we'll put together a little bit of language and take a vote to accept the transfer of these domain names as property of the IDESG and as our first asset of any type. And maybe we could even issue a press release or something. So Daza, I'll work with you on wording of that. And by the way, I appreciate, and I hope the organization appreciates the forethought to actually get a domain name. It's having been through bad versions of that in the past, it's very much appreciated. So thank you, Daza.
You're welcome. It was partly defensive to make sure that someone else didn't squat on it and create a problem. It was partly with a sense of hope that this day would come where we had a corporation and the group was growing and it was getting traction, and that there would be an entity on the other side to transfer these to. And so I have to say it's a proud moment, and it's a great way also to end the term, to be able to have got to the point where you could have an e-deliberation and a plenary statement that it directs the management council, or however you're going to put it, to receive property and to get an identity and to get moving. So it's a pleasure, and thank you, Bob.
Thank you. And on that note, Kay, could I have the slide to begin the process of transition to the new regime? I've asked the Secretariat to put a slide together enumerating the names of our new officers. And Kim, could you come up here? Okay. Yes, we can. So your new management council, the chair will be Peter Brown, the vice chair will be Jeremy Grant. That is, for the time being, still an unelected position as a result of an interesting feature of our rules of association. We have at-large delegates Ian Glazer and Adam Madlin, newly elected. Our new privacy and civil liberties delegate is Adrian Gropper. Steve Brook remains the usability and human factors representative. Next slide, please. The Consumer Advocates delegate Jim Barnett retains his position, as does Deb Gallagher for U.S. federal government. U.S. state, local, tribal, and territorial government, Dave Burhop remains in the position. Research, development, education, and innovation, Jack Seuss remains in the position. We have a new identity and attribute provider representative, Matthew Thompson. IT infrastructure is Paul Laurent. Mark Kader represents regulated injuries. Kalia Hamlin, identity woman. What did I say? Injuries. Did I say injuries? It's been a long week. Industries, enunciate. Yes, I should be more careful. Kalia represents small business and entrepreneurs. Neville Pattinson represents security. Pete Paridis represents relying parties, and Jim Zock represents unaffiliated individuals. And of course, we have a new chair and vice chair replacing myself and Daza. Kim Sutherland and Andrew Hughes are our new chair and vice chair. And I will, with this sort of as my last official act, turn it over to Kim to announce the date and place of the next plenary and to adjourn us. Kim.
So we will gather again June 17th through the 19th. At the NIST facilities in Gaithersburg, Maryland. So that'll be the next time we have our plenary session. I hope that all of you are able to come, or many of you are able to come. If you are not able to be there in person, there are always other ways, just like we have this time, for you to be able to dial in or to have video to be able to see what's going on. So participation's key. How you participate, we want to have flexibility for that. Is there anything else that anyone needs to share? Oh, you want to give that?
It's kind of backing up, but do you?
That's okay. Go ahead.
This was a comment earlier from Brett McDowell, and it was kind of related to some of the things that Bob was raising. He said, what would you recommend the answer be to a question that he often gets, which is, do you see anything useful coming out of IDESG? And if yes, what and when? This question is not a challenge. I'm looking for a concise answer that might help the identity ecosystem stakeholders better articulate that value proposition for increasing engagement.
And so I'll respond to that. And I think that the answer I'd give is that wait a little bit until we have the feedback around the framework, because if we can talk more about how the framework is going to be, then people can see maybe where things fit and where they can have some value. We're obviously working on our value propositions, and more feedback might come out of our retreat that we're going to have in a couple of weeks. So we know that having a very concise way to show value, to show benefits, is something that we have been challenged with. And we will work on trying to continue to figure out a way to get that very clear to everybody. So thanks, Brett. That's definitely a truism. Any other comments by anybody? Well, then thank you so much for spending these last couple of days working really hard and giving your ideas and presenting different topics. And we look forward to seeing you soon. And safe travels for all those that are not from the Bay Area. Well, safe travels if you're from the Bay Area, too. Get home safely. So see you soon. Thank you. This is adjourned.
Hear the